Yeah, well, look, I think my views on Brexit are well known. And I think if we tumble out of Europe without a deal, it's a very unwise thing for Britain to do. The only thing I think is that, because Brexit's a fact now, Britain, because of the international department, the DFID, that we created, actually was one of the first acts of my government in 1997. And because we then secured its budget with the commitment to 0.7, we have, DFID is a respected body with a large budget, and we have a real role to play in Africa, and we should be looking to play that role because, frankly, we're obviously not going to have the same position in Europe. And if we're not careful, we won't have the same position with the USA either. So Britain, if it wants to be an independent player, it's got to find niche places that it can play. And Africa is one because of the strength of that commitment. And actually breaking down trade barriers within Africa is hugely important. And that Africa Free Trade Agreement, that I think a lot of people were skeptical will ever come about, that's a really important thing for Africa in the future. So, yes, you're right, to one degree, Britain, obviously it's going to be hard for it to articulate, or harder for it to articulate the benefits of free trade if it itself has turned its back on the major trading area on its doorstep. On the other hand, it can argue for the principle of trade barriers coming down, and for Africa, there's no doubt that would be a big gain and should be done. That's one thing that Africa should do. And the other thing is, which I'm passionate about, is the application of technology in Africa. So I think the other big challenge for Africa is, how do you develop your own tech sector and bring both outside and develop inside the technology that will allow you to accelerate development and avoid the legacy systems of the West in healthcare, education, in digitization, government.
The 20th century had these big fights about the place of the role of the state and the market. You came up with you and others came up with a synthesis of positions with the third way. I mean, you mentioned there the importance of digitization. The investment that South Korea made in broadband networks in the 1990s, very much a state-led decision, has allowed it to be the only country to put up a challenger, really, to Apple. Are these questions that African states should be asking themselves, or are they, at a Hobbesian level of state formation, put on hold by centuries and centuries of colonization?
Yeah, no, look, the important thing about the state and the market and the third way was to say, work out the reality of the world, work out what the challenges are, and then work out solutions that are practical. And in today's world, those practical solutions will involve a combination of state and market and public and private sector. Now, how you combine them in any individual set of circumstances is a completely open question. And people always when I describe it in that way, people say, well, this is just a technocratic approach. And I say to them, no, it's the values behind how you approach these practical questions are very real. Values about equality of opportunity, the broad-based prosperity, and so on. But your solutions have got to be practical solutions. Now, for African countries, and of course, they should be developing their own technology sectors. They've got large markets that they can use these technologies in. If you take, for example, Kenya and financial payments, that M-Pesa system was well ahead of the rest of the world. I actually think today, for the first time, you've got a whole group of, I mean, you'll know this from the work you do as journalists, there's a whole group of tech entrepreneurs in Africa that 10 years ago you just wouldn't have found, right? But they're there today and they're doing some really smart and interesting things. The important thing for government is that it's got to be modern-minded, and it's got to root out corruption. So if you have a government that has got institutional capability around ICT, and you have the rule of law so people know they can come in and contracts are going to be honored and corruption's cut out of the system, you can make your economy grow fast and you can build big companies. What you can't do is build a strong economy if there's too much bureaucracy, regulation that's often completely out of date, or elements of government that are corrupt, because then it's impossible for business to thrive.
Of all presidents you have advised, which has given the results you are most proud of?
So here's the thing, Remy, when you answer that question, you make one friend and several enemies. So so I never rank my countries or the presidents or I never rank the countries we work with or the presidents we work with. But I will say this, that there is no doubt to my mind, there is a quantum change in the quality of leadership in African countries today. It is improving all the time. Now, there are some countries which still operate in very old ways, but the types of conversation you're having with African presidents today is very different from even 10 years ago when we first began the work that we did in Africa, or actually 12 years ago now. And there's the change is really that, number one, the leadership of the country, as I say, wants to take the country's destiny in their own hands. They're much less willing to make excuses and trying to drive change. And secondly, they value efficacy. I mean, one of the reasons why, someone like President Kagame is respected is because he's seen to have delivered. And you can see this right across Africa now. The countries we work with, I would say the quality of leadership is very high. You've got really smart, capable leaders who are wanting to do the best for their country. And that's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about Africa. Yes, there's still massive change to come about, but there has been a lot of change and it's made a big difference.
Is it possible to, or rather, should we draw a line between the statue of Colston being toppled, Lord Lugard assembling various territories in West Africa into Nigeria in the 1800s, the decolonization, or the way in which the UK decolonized in the 1960s, favoring certain power blocks over the others, and the concerns of overhyped concerns of mass migration that we see today, but which has a real impact on the politics of Europe. Given the state of affairs in the US and the sort of the global consciousness of this moment, is there reflection that the UK should be doing? And how much does your role in the Governance Institute allow you to see the sort of dysfunctional politics and also, the potential ways out?
Yeah, look, but both in government and afterwards, you're dealing with deep-seated problems that take a long time to resolve. And one of those is the racism that has run very deep in Western societies and still does. But there has been change, and in the end, I think there will be more change to come. But, the quality of the conversation that you have with from an institute perspective in Africa, is very much about, the future and not the past. So, which is not to say people don't recognize the role that colonialism played. But whereas when I first became Prime Minister over 20 years ago, it will form a big part of the conversation. Today, presidents are much more focused on building institutional capability in their own countries for the future. And frankly, they're as worried by contemporary issues as they are by the past. So if you talk to the presidents in the Sahel, where we've begun to work now, who are, you've got some of very capable presidents there. And what their biggest anxiety is the destabilization coming down, particularly from Libya, actually, down into the Sahel. And just as they're trying to get on their feet and develop, they've got problems of terrorism, extremism, and so on. So my sense is the debate in Africa is slightly different from the debate in the West. In the West, we're having to come to terms with our past and deal with it. In Africa, people are, in my experience at least, they're actually in the here and now and trying to make sure that they focus internally on how they make their country stronger and how they prevent themselves being overrun by problems that are nothing to do with them. They regard COVID, I think, in somewhat the same way. COVID came from the outside, and now they're having to make all these agonizing decisions. So that's more their concern today. But countries come to terms with their own history over time, and you just got to help them do that. And so I think, in one sense, the debate that's happening in the West is a healthy debate.
Our thanks to Tony Blair. That's all for this week. Please rate and review Talking Africa wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help others find us and actually counts as one of your 5-a-day Good Samaritan deeds. Head to theafricareport.com for the latest news, analysis and comment. And while you're there, you can download our exclusive list of Africa's top 50 disruptors, the women and men shaking up paradigms and generally making a nuisance of themselves. I'm Nick Norbrook. Thanks for listening.